It's Sunday morning, June 7th, 1992. The front door of a home in Springfield, Missouri, has broken glass on its front step from the porch light. Inside the home, 3 purses are lined up in a row. There's a dog inside the house, but no one answers when friends call out. Suzy Streeter, her mother Sherrill Levitt, and Suzy's best friend Stacy McCall are nowhere to be found. Just the day before, Suzy and Stacy had graduated from Kickapoo High School. Their names were printed proudly in the local newspaper, alongside hundreds of others. It should have been a weekend of parties and future plans. They'd grown up together. They'd been friends since second grade. And on June 6th, they crossed the stage at the Hammons Student Center with Sherrill watching from the audience. By Monday morning, June 8th, the Springfield Police Department would officially consider all 3 women missing. Welcome to the Beach House 34 True Crime and Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Worth, and today you're going to hear an updated Encore episode of the Springfield Three. Before we get into today's episode, I want to let you know that you can get uncensored versions of this podcast, along with early access by becoming a Patreon member. If you enjoy the podcast, please check it out at patreon.com/beachhouse34. Suzy and Stacy had big plans for the night of their graduation. They, along with their friend Janelle, were planning on heading to Branson later that night because they planned on going to a water park the next day. At 8:15 that night, Suzy, Stacy, and Janelle got together at Janelle's house in Battlefield, Missouri, about 10 miles away from Springfield, so that they could all go to a graduation/birthday party nearby. At 8:30, the girls walk from Janelle's to Brian Joy's house in Battlefield. An hour later, at 9:30 that night, Janelle calls her mom and told her that instead of leaving for Branson that night as they had planned, they were going to stay at the party and then leave for Branson in the morning. At that same time, Suzy's mom, Sherrill, is at home and she gets a phone call from a friend. At 10:30, Stacy then calls her mom and told her that they had decided to go to Branson the next morning and that her and Suzy were going to stay at Janelle's that night. Around 12:45 in the morning, several people, along with Suzy and Stacy, head to a second party that's in Springfield on East Hanover Street. Suzy and Stacy left their cars at Janelle's and rode with friends. They leave this party at 1:50 in the morning and head back to Brian Joy's house in Battlefield. Once they arrived at Brian's around 2:10 in the morning, Brian says that they can't sleep there, so Janelle invites them to sleep at her house. Janelle had a lot of family members at her place, though, and it was very crowded. So Suzy and Stacy decided instead to drive back to Suzy's house in Springfield. At 2:15 in the morning, Sherrill, Suzy's mom, arrives at Apco A-Mart on South Fremont Avenue looking for Suzy and Stacy. At 2:20 in the morning, Stacy, driving her car, follows Suzy, driving hers, and they leave Janelle's house in Battlefield to head back to Suzy's in Springfield. At this point, Sherrill is already driving around looking for the girls. At around 8:30 in the morning, hours after Sherrill has gone looking for them and the girls are driving back to Suzy's house, their friend Janelle called Suzy's because they were all planning to head to Branson that day. Janelle knows that they left her place around 2:15 in the morning and headed back to Springfield. Janelle called nearly a dozen times, and each time, no one answered the phone. Finally, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Janelle called and told Janice, Stacy's mom, that Stacy had slept at Suzy's house last night, and Janice thought that Stacy had actually stayed at Janelle's. So Janice then called Suzy's house, where again there was no answer. So what she did was she left a message for Stacy just to see if she needed anything. Janelle then decides to head to Suzy's house herself and takes along her boyfriend, Mike. When they get there, they see that Suzy and Stacy's cars were in the driveway, and Sherrill's car was in the carport. Then they noticed that the front porch light had been broken, and glass was lying there right on the front porch. Janelle didn't have shoes on, so Mike went up to the door, while Janelle walked around the outside of the house to see if she could see inside. She was able to see inside Sherrill's bedroom and saw Sherrill's bed with the covers pulled back. As she made her way back to the carport, Janelle could see Suzy's bedroom window that faced that side of the house, and she could see that in her bedroom window, the blinds were bent, like someone had been looking outside. Back at the front door, though, no one was answering, so they tried the doorknob, and they found it unlocked, so they went inside the house. As Janelle looked around the house, nothing seemed out of place. At the bottom of the stairs, leading up to Suzy's bedroom, all three purses were there: Suzy's, Stacy's, and Sherrill's. And nearby, all of their car keys. The purses weren't tossed or thrown on a chair or just randomly left on the floor. They were all lined up neatly, like someone had placed them there on purpose. Now, at the time, Janelle didn't think much of it, but here's something worth pausing on. It was late when the girls got home, pushing 2:30 in the morning. They'd just been to 2 parties, were tired, maybe a little buzzed. Would they really take time to arrange their purses all in a row? Or were the purses moved afterward? Janelle then noticed that the answering machine was blinking, so she pressed play, only to hear her own voice from one of the calls that she had made that morning. With no sign of anyone home, they left the door unlocked just in case Sherrill came back and didn't have a key. Mike swept up the broken glass on the porch, and they headed out. They spent a couple of hours at a friend's place and tried calling Suzy's house again with still no answer. By 3:30, they decided to go back to the house. Nothing had changed since their earlier visit. But while they were there, the phone rang. Janelle answered, and it was an obscene phone call. There was heavy breathing and sexual language. So she hung up. Then it rang again. She picked it up a second time. Same voice, same kind of call. After that, her and her boyfriend decided to leave to get something to eat. That's when Janelle started to cry. Mike told her not to worry, and to take her mind off of it, they went to HydraSlide, a local water park. And here's where the timeline starts to feel off, not just in what happened, but in how people reacted. Janelle's been to the house twice now. The door's unlocked. All 3 cars are there. The purses are inside. She's answered 2 obscene phone calls, and still she doesn't call the police. Instead, she goes to get food, then to a water park. So why doesn't she do more? Was it denial? I mean, 19 is young. Maybe she didn't want to overreact. Maybe she thought that the women had gone out and would be back any minute. Or maybe, and this is just a possibility, she didn't want to be the one to raise the alarm. Not yet. But by now, it's been more than 12 hours since Suzy and Stacy were last seen. And Sherrill, no one's heard from her since 9:30 the night before when she got that phone call at home. So at what point does "they'll be back soon" become something's wrong? Meanwhile, Stacy's parents still haven't heard from their daughter. She hasn't called that morning to say that she was heading to Branson, something she always did if plans changed. Janice, her mom, called Suzy's house a few more times throughout the day with no answer. And eventually she and her husband decided to go ahead with their own plans. They spent the day at Lake Springfield, assuming that Stacy had gone to Branson with the others. This water park in Branson that they were heading to closed at 6 o'clock. By 7 o'clock that night, there was still nothing. No call, no update. Janice tried Suzy's house again with still no answer. Around 7:30, Janice then gets a call from the mother of another friend, Adina. And she said, "Did you know that when Janelle went over to Susie's, all the cars were there and the purses too?" What's unclear is how Adina's mom knew this. Adina wasn't at the party. She hadn't been to the house that day. So the information must have come in secondhand, probably from Janelle or someone Janelle talked to, which raises an important question. If someone already knew all the cars and purses were there and the girls still hadn't been seen, why didn't they tell Janice earlier? Why was that information just circulating among friends, but not triggering more of an alarm? That's when Janice knew something wasn't right. She was already uneasy, but now she was upset. She tracked down Janelle and Mike at HydraSlide, and not long after this, at least 10 people made their way into Suzy and Sherrill's house. Janice went in first, calling out as she stepped through the door. It was starting to get dark and none of the lights were on. She tried the switch for the porch light, but nothing happened. Inside, she looked for a lamp, something that she could turn on so she could see better. There was also Sherrill's little Yorkie, Cinnamon, who was darting around the house, yipping and agitated, acting like something was off. They searched the house. They even stepped out into the backyard, calling out for any of them, but nothing. Then, at the bottom of the stairs to Suzy's bedroom, they saw the 3 purses. Jewelry was also still laid out in a bathroom tray. Sherrill's cigarettes were there, Stacy's migraine medication, her flowered shorts, her new Gucci graduation watch. They stayed in the house for about an hour, waiting and hoping, and Janice would later say, "We were beginning to panic." They couldn't find a phone book, so they flipped through Sherrill's address book and started calling anyone who might know where the women were. And all the while, people were walking in and out of the house, touching doorknobs, picking up phones, cleaning up glass. No one had said the words yet, but it's worth pausing here. If this was a crime scene, and at this point it's starting to look like it might be, then what's happening right now? It's being trampled without anyone even realizing it. Eventually, Janice picked up the phone and called the non-emergency number, and she hesitated, later saying, "I didn't want to call 911. I didn't think it was an emergency." But at that point, no one had heard from Sherrill, Suzy, or Stacy in nearly 24 hours. The house was full of their things, but no sign of them. And now, finally, law enforcement was being brought in. In the past year alone, Springfield police had logged 375 missing persons reports. Most of those cases resolved pretty quickly. People walked out, then came back, a day or two, sometimes less. But this one felt different. When officers Rick Bookout and a second officer arrived at the house, they were met with something unexpected, a house full of people. Family, friends already inside, already moving around. Janice told them they're just not here. The officers then walked through the house. Suzy's bed looked like it had been slept in. In the trash, they found tissues with makeup on them, suggesting that the girls had washed up before bed. Janice had already noticed it, but now the officers saw it too, the jewelry that was left out in plain view, no signs of theft. The 3 purses were still near the stairs to Suzy's bedroom, neatly lined up. When one officer looked through them, he found a wad of cash in Sherrill's. Her cigarettes and lighter were also there too, and that kind of stopped him. Sherrill was a chain smoker. She never left home without them. Another purse contained prescription medication. It was Stacy's migraine medicine. At 2:50 in the morning on June 8th, the women were officially reported missing. Nearly 23 hours had passed. But inside the house, the scene had already been touched. More than a dozen people had come through this house, walking through rooms, picking up phones, even cleaning up that broken glass on the front porch. No one had meant to interfere. They were scared. They were looking for answers. But if this was a crime scene, and by now that's the working theory, it's already been compromised. Any fingerprints found would now have to be cross-checked against every person who had walked through that front door. Police asked everyone to leave the house. They took a set of keys from inside and left a note on the table just in case the women came back. They then locked the door behind them. Janice and Stu McCall, Stacy's parents, were the last to go. Before leaving, they handed the officers a photo of Stacy, and police circulated this photo to local hospitals, checking to see if anyone matching her description had been admitted. No one had. Then they called the radio stations. It was time to go public. When Janice and Stu finally got home, it was close to 3 o'clock in the morning, and Janice went to bed. Stu stayed up. He stretched out on the living room couch just in case Stacy came through the door. Neither of them really slept. Meanwhile, police were processing what they could. There were no signs of forced entry, but that porch light was broken, and there were still a few shards of glass left behind. If you remember, Mike had swept up most of it earlier that day. Detective David Asher took the lead on this case. He and a team of officers spent hours inside the house collecting fingerprints, sorting through belongings, and documenting what little was left to go on. They stayed for 11 hours, but even after all that time, there was no sign of forced entry, no obvious struggle, no blood, just a house that looked mostly untouched. Theories started to form early. Either someone or more than one person had forced the women to leave, or they walked out willingly, led by someone they knew, under false pretenses, someone who didn't need to break in. Outside of the house, the search had already begun. Friends and family fanned out across Springfield, handing out flyers and checking in with anyone who might have seen them. But even as those circles expanded, some absences kind of stood out. Adina, one of the girls' friends, was mentioned in passing in a local newspaper. Her family had invited Sherrill to dinner the night of the graduation, and Sherrill had declined. And while Adina was considered part of their social group, there was no record of her attending the parties that night or planning to go to the water park in Branson the next day. It's the kind of detail that might seem small, but in a case where the line between routine and wrong feels like razor thin, even things like these start to stand out. Some of Sherrill's friends were surprised that she hadn't actually gone out that night. By all accounts, she and Susie were extremely close, and it seemed out of character for Sherrill to have stayed home alone while her daughter celebrated such a major milestone in her life. As Detective Asher began his interviews, he started with the families. There was already a question taking shape. Was Sherrill the intended target? Her sister described her as a unique person, intense, passionate, responsible, smart, and savvy. And the only way someone would get the best of her is to hold a gun to her child's head. Sherrill had been divorced for 3 years. She'd been married twice, but hadn't dated since the second divorce in 1989. Friends described her as quiet and friendly and mostly private. She worked as a hairdresser at a local salon and spent her off hours working on her yard or fixing up the house. She was also known for being strict with Susie. One friend, Janet, remembered that if Susie got a phone call after 10 p.m., Sherrill wouldn't let her answer it. "So I know," she said, "she would never let her answer the door after 10, especially not at 2 a.m. By this point in the timeline, police had narrowed it down. The women disappeared sometime after 2 a.m. on Sunday. Suzy and Stacy didn't return to the house until around then, and by morning, they were gone. And police often look at those that are closest to the potential victims, right? Sherrill rarely spoke about her past marriages. Her son, Bart, had confirmed that. His father, Sherrill's first husband, Brent, hadn't been in contact with the family for years. And her second husband, Don, was harder to pin down. No one seemed to know where he was. According to Bart, he pretty much left my mom in debt and took off. Sherrill had even at one point tried to hire an attorney to track Don down. Creditors were after her to settle debts that he had left behind, but Don had just vanished. By Tuesday, June 10th, the FBI had officially joined in the search. More than 30 officers, including local police and federal agents, began questioning over 100 people. They even took to the air. They scanned wooded areas and the waterways from above. Among those questions were Sherrill's son and Suzy's older brother, Bart. He was 27 at the time. Now, Bart had a history with alcohol, and the family dynamic was strained. He'd been disinherited by Sherrill and distanced by Suzy, who was reportedly afraid of him. Bart had a temper, and at one point he had physically assaulted their mother. For years, Bart had lived out of state, but after a breakup, he returned to Springfield, got sober, and took a job with a surveying company. The police brought him in for questioning, and Bart told them he hadn't spoken with his mother or sister for a few months, reportedly due to issues involving one of Suzy's boyfriends. But he also said he felt close to Sherrill. He claimed that on the night the women disappeared, he'd been drinking and watching TV at a neighbor's house. The neighbor confirmed that, but said Bart went home around 11:30 p.m. After that, Bart said he fell asleep. With no witnesses, that part of his alibi couldn't be verified. On June 12th, he took the polygraph and he passed. The boyfriend that Bart may have been referring to was Mike Kovacs. He was 17 at the time. Friends of Suzy's family said the relationship had turned physical. Suzy and Mike had dated for about 2 years, breaking up in December 1991, about 8 months before she disappeared. Afterward, Mike told reporters he was worried about Suzy, didn't know what to do, and planned to speak with police. What wasn't widely known at the time, but surfaced in public records, was that Suzy had taken legal action against him. According to Greene County Circuit Court documents, on October 23rd, she had filed for a protective order. The statement outlined a pattern. Mike had allegedly beaten her, slashed her tires, threatened her over the phone, and harassed her at home, school, and work. One line reads, quote, "I am afraid of him and there is an immediate and present danger of abuse to me," unquote. Mike denied all of it. He claimed that after they broke up, he never spoke to her again. At one point, Suzy had even lived with Mike and his grandmother told reporters that she'd seen the couple fight, saying he never really hurt her. They would scuffle. It was sort of him just pushing her around. And then she added, "Mike's still just a kid, remember? You've got to be pretty grown up to know you just don't hit a woman." Suzy was scheduled to appear in court on November 5th to extend the protective order, but she didn't show. As a result, this order expired. Police said that they didn't consider Mike a suspect, but he was one of several people that they were looking at closely, people with gaps in their timelines during the critical early hours of June 7th. Mike told police that he was alone that night. No one could verify that. He took a polygraph too. He passed. Another former boyfriend in the investigators' crosshairs was 20-year-old Dustin and his friends Michael and Joseph. They were all implicated in a bizarre February Mausoleum Break-In at Maple Park Cemetery, where they reportedly removed gold-filled teeth from corpses. Suzy's car was allegedly used in that vandalism, so she was questioned and expected to testify in court. One of her boyfriend's friends that was with him that night during this incident, also named Michael, made a shocking remark during his interview with investigators and said, "I wish those bitches were dead." It was plural, those bitches, which left police unsure who he meant but it certainly raised some red flags. On the night that the women vanished, the boyfriend, Dustin, claimed he was passed out in a car. No one could confirm it. His friends, Michael and Joseph, also claimed to be elsewhere, but they too really had no alibis. All three of them were fingerprinted, and none of them matched any of the prints found in the house. Still, that absence of fingerprints didn't rule them out. What if they had gotten everyone outside before entering, or just never touched anything inside? Both Dustin and Michael agreed to polygraphs, and they passed. They were released. Dustin's court date for this mausoleum vandalism was scheduled for September of 1992, and Michael, the friend of Dustin's, didn't show up. He had jumped bail and was later arrested in California, hitchhiking. His other friend, Joseph, who had been with him, fled to Illinois shortly after June 7th, which also drew police scrutiny. He was eventually arrested on the mausoleum charges and extradited back to Springfield. According to law enforcement, he was interviewed, fingerprinted, and, like the others, passed a polygraph in Illinois on October 13th, 1992. That left them all officially cleared for the time being, but no one fully relaxed. One or two polygraph refusals were rumored among the 21 tests that were given early on, though the specific person or people who had refused them was never confirmed. By June 11th, days after the disappearance, the police confirmed that they were focusing on between 3 to 5 persons of interest, though no names were publicly released. One tip led them to this strange vehicle that had been seen early Sunday morning near Delmar Street, where Suzy lived. Someone saw a car in that neighborhood, the report said. It was unspecific, but potentially meaningful. A witness would later describe a dark brown or greenish Dodge van, around 1967 to 1970 model, rusted along the bottom, missing the rear and side windows, and that it was parked near Suzy and Sherrill's house around 4:30 in the morning on June 7th. While the local investigation continued, the CBS show 48 Hours arrived in Springfield to document the search. Their episode, airing in July, was part of this broader focus on Route 66. Another development, the house on Delmar was actually new to Sherrill. She had only moved in just weeks earlier. And Sherrill had been warned that the area, particularly near the carport and the adjacent parking lot, was often visited by transients and late-night partiers. A year earlier, a woman said that she had caught a man peering in through the carport, and just 18 months before the disappearance, she had heard someone trying to open the screen door from the carport and a voice asking, "Is anybody home?" And when she was asked what this person looked like, she described him as an awful-looking, dirty old guy. When these reports reached police, one officer told the local newspaper, "In my experience, homeless transients usually have other things on their minds than kidnapping people. How to get wine, mostly." Stacy's father, Stu, was a near constant presence at the police station. He came by day and night, even during his lunch breaks. He wanted to stay close to the investigation. The case of these missing women was now starting to gain national attention. First, America's Most Wanted had agreed to feature the case very briefly. The segment was meant to air at the end of the episode, but instead it ran about 15 minutes in. And the result was a flood of call-in tips, far more than the police were prepared to process. Second, divers were sent into Lake Springfield. They spent the entire day in the water, but they found nothing. The plan was to continue the search the next day at nearby lakes. And third, the police put out a request for help locating 2 vehicles reported stolen the same night the women vanished: a burgundy Toyota Supra and a dark blue 19-foot Dodge van that had been converted into a motorhome. Fourth, they received this anonymous tip by way of an actual map. The map was found after a caller told police where to look, and it pointed to an apartment complex in northwest Springfield with a scribbled note, quote, "Use ruse of gas man checking for leak." Police canvassed the complex, dozens of units, but found nothing. Eventually, they concluded the tip had led them nowhere. It was this wild goose chase. By June 13th, the search had expanded into the surrounding countryside. Officers fanned out on horseback, on foot, and on all-terrain vehicles combing through the remote areas. They found tire tracks, discarded liquor bottles, soda cans, and a few empty shotgun shells. It's unclear whether any of these items were taken in for testing. Around the same time, police released a composite sketch of a man described as a transient. He'd been seen in the neighborhood near Sherrill's home, and the image was printed in local newspapers. On Tuesday, June 16th, the calls started coming in. Hundreds of them. People across the area said they'd seen someone who matched the sketch. He was described as between 5'8" and 5'9", weighing around 145 pounds, with shoulder-length sandy or reddish-brown hair, a freckled tan complexion, and estimated to be between 34 and 48 years old. This man was of particular interest because multiple witnesses had seen him near Sherrill and Suzy's house, not just once, but twice on Friday, June 6th. The first time was around 8:45 in the morning, and again in the early afternoon, between 3 and 3:15. Then, the next day, Saturday, June 7th, he was reportedly spotted again, this time sitting in a grassy area not far from their home. On June 17th, police received a tip from a man named Steve Thompson, who worked the night shift at the Apco A-Mart on South Fremont Avenue. He said that around 2:15 in the morning on Sunday, June 7th, a woman came into the store in a hurry. She asked if she'd seen Suzy, a brunette friend, and a blonde friend, describing the girls but not naming them. At the time, he thought she was just a concerned parent. It wasn't until a few days later, when he saw the missing posters, that he realized the woman who'd come in was Sherrill Levitt. Sherrill had previously lived nearby and was familiar with the store. She and the girls stopped in from time to time. According to Thompson, the encounter was brief. She asked whether the girls had come in during the past hour or two, and he told her no, and she left as quickly as she'd arrived. Thompson also believed that Suzy and one of her friends had been in the store earlier that night, between 10 and 10:30 on Saturday, but friends of the girls said that never happened. One detail stood out to police, though. The woman didn't leave in Sherrill's blue Mitsubishi Eclipse. Thompson recalled her driving off in a larger, older car, something like a Cutlass or a Grand Prix that was dark in color. At that point, police didn't have any new suspects, but they believed someone might have called Sherrill's house after her 9:30 p.m. phone conversation on Saturday night. By Saturday, June 20th, the investigation had started to shift. Detectives were now focusing more on Sherrill's background rather than on the girls, and increasingly considering the possibility of a transient abductor. They were still chasing tips. Since the women vanished, more than 600 tips had come in. But one of them, lead number 259, stood out. An anonymous caller said he worked with a white female at the Grand Palace in Branson the night of June 6th. According to him, this woman was bragging about knowing who took the three girls. She wouldn't name names, but said a woman was also involved. The tipster said she lived somewhere nearby. Detective Woods took the lead. By 11:40 a.m. on Thursday, June 18th, he'd photocopied the report and gotten clearance to investigate. By 11:52, he'd run a computer search on the woman's name. She lived in Springfield. There was no photo or any phone number. Over the next hour, Woods juggled calls and tracked down other leads, one of which involved a man seen near a local business not far from Sherrill's house who resembled the earlier composite sketch. By 2:45, he was back in the office, still trying to trace the woman mentioned in lead number 259, not as a suspect, but as someone who might know something. He brought in another detective for review, and more calls followed. At 4:11, the crew from 48 Hours sat down to ask Woods a few questions, and by 4:30, he was back answering calls on the department's tip line. Just after 5 o'clock, he found a local company that might be able to reach this woman, but decided to wait until morning to follow up. He left the office at 6 o'clock, planning to return before 7 o'clock the next day. So what happened with lead number 259? Unfortunately, it's not clear. The trail goes cold in the records, and there's no public update after that. Maybe it folded into another lead. Maybe it hit a dead end. If there's more to it, I haven't been able to find it, but it really sticks out as something that may have been pretty important. By June 21st, 1992, 2 weeks in, the women were still missing. On July 8th, Police Chief Terry Knowles described the investigation as a marathon with no finish line in sight. He said, "I believe very sincerely there is somebody involved, directly or indirectly, who knows more." By the second month, investigators had firmed up some findings from the crime scene. Broken thumbprints showed that the women left through the front door, not the carport door. Stacy was barefoot when she left. Police believed more than one person was involved in the abduction. 24 detectives and officers remained on the case. Chief Knowles also acknowledged complications caused by the compromised scene at the house. Some purses and items had been moved. Witness accounts were inconsistent. Investigators recovered 60 fingerprints but had to exclude prints from 18 people who had been in the house before the police arrived. July 8th, 31 days into the disappearance, investigators made a surprising move. They brought in a 52-year-old clairvoyant named Carl Shootman. Shootman claimed to have helped find missing people in multiple states and said he'd worked with law enforcement, including the FBI. He reached out after hearing about the case on America's Most Wanted. He mentioned a brown van and offered insights into the people's motives, details police believed hadn't been made public. The FBI's involving theory, intriguingly close to Shootman's narrative, was that at least 2 people were involved, and one may have known the women, possibly luring them out under false pretenses. He reportedly asked for only travel expenses, declaring, "Money is the root of all evil. Everything I do, I want to do honestly. This is a gift from God." Police stated they didn't generally rely on psychic leads and had never brought one in before, but they were hopeful. It's not clear whether Shootman was ever formally interviewed or allowed access to case files. In September of 1992, nearly 3 months now after the women disappeared, a local newspaper published an account from a witness who had come forward about a moss green van. This woman, who asked not to be identified, said she saw the van shortly after sunrise. Inside, she saw a young blonde woman in the driver's seat. A man's voice shouted from inside the vehicle, "Turn around and back up. Don't do anything silly or stupid." Startled and afraid, the witness said she didn't report it. "I went into the house and tried to forget about it," she later told police. It wasn't until 17 days later that the police learned of the sighting, and it took another month before a team of crime analysts flagged the report for investigators. Police declined to say exactly where the van was seen to protect the witness's identity, but they did share her description of the vehicle. A moss green Dodge panel van, likely from 1964 to 1970. Rear windows painted over from the inside. Large round headlights and round taillights. No stickers, emblems, plates, dents, or visible rust. A front grille that was either off-white or lightly rusted. The paint appeared fresh, newly applied. The witness said the woman in the van resembled Suzy Streeter. By June 6, 1993, a full year had passed. Investigators no longer believed that the women were still alive, though they continued to pray for their safety. The case had quieted down. Only 2 detectives remained assigned. The tips still came in, but most were just memories that were dated months or even a year old. On August 28, 1993, a search operation began in Webster County, about 40 miles southeast of Springfield. The search, spread across 2 locations, lasted 15 hours. A court order forbade any public discussion, but anonymous sources suggested that officers were searching for possible remains. Tip-offs from a confidential informant led to 3 search warrants that were served at 2 separate sites. Police refused to disclose either the informant's identity or the nature of the evidence found. By September 4th, documents related to the Webster County searches were sealed. Any items seized were sent to the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab in Jefferson City. When testing was complete, the results reportedly provided no definitive answers. Then, on October 31st, 1993, a little under 5 months after those searches, a van was discovered at a campground in Indiana. It was a blue 1985 Dodge Ram with a camper top, found 8 miles east of Versailles, Indiana. The license plates were missing, but the VIN matched a van stolen in Springfield between June 4th through 9th, the same week the women disappeared. The campground stay seemed incidental. The couple who brought the van visited over the summer and eventually left it behind. Investigators, while noting the coincidence, didn't link it to the abduction. Still, they confirmed the theft took place just blocks from Sherrill's home. The van was examined by Indiana police and remains under investigation, with findings to be forwarded to Springfield authorities. But the Springfield Police Department made it clear their priority was locating a different vehicle, that early 1960s metallic green, moss green Dodge panel van. Then, on December 12th of 1993, police confirmed that a jail inmate who claimed to know what happened to the missing women had been lying. His claims had prompted the August searches in Webster County on property still under a sealed gag order. Officers had recovered bones from the site, but forensic analysis showed they were animal remains. A van was also found there, but it wasn't the one investigators were looking for. The gag order remains in effect, and authorities say the sealed documents included multiple names, and revealing them could compromise the case. Despite the inmate's deception, police noted that he had shared some information not previously released to the public. While skeptical, investigators said they were still working through a large amount of material from multiple sources. The lead wasn't promising, but it wasn't fully dismissed either. By November 4th of 1994, only 1 detective remained assigned to the case. Then on February 24th, 1995, 1,000 days since the women vanished, Springfield police offered this update. More than 4,470 police reports had been filed. Over 400 people had been interviewed. Roughly 2,000 names had been logged, witnesses, informants, potential suspects. And yet, not a single person had been charged. The lone detective on the case still believed it could be solved. He didn't want to see it declared cold. But in March of 1995, even that last thread began to fray. The department reassigned him. He would no longer work exclusively on the case. In September 1995, the television show Sightings arrived in Springfield to film a segment on the missing women. Known for its focus on the paranormal, the show brought along a 70-year-old psychic named Dorothy Allison, who had reportedly assisted police in previous missing persons cases. Allison first visited the home on Delmar Street where the abduction was believed to have taken place. But the current owners refused to let the crew inside. Still, she felt a strong vibe from the property. She then led the crew to several unexpected sites around Springfield, at the 3M chemical plant on East Chestnut Expressway. She said she recognized a particular smell that she'd been sensing. She was drawn to a warehouse, a used car lot, and a gay bar in the area. Allison also pointed investigators toward a location in eastern Greene County, where a man had reported seeing what looked like 3 disturbed grave sites. Notably, she described feeling a strong pull toward the area before being told about the potential graves. Plans were made to bring in cadaver dogs to investigate. When shown a missing persons poster, Allison stated outright that she believed the women had been murdered. That same month, another name surfaced publicly: Stephen Garrison. He was standing trial for the rape of a woman in Springfield, an attack that occurred in August 1993. Garrison had already been on the radar of Springfield police as a potential suspect in the 1992 disappearances. Just 10 days before the rape, Garrison had been in jail on a weapons charge, and police arranged for him to be released on bond, hoping he might talk more openly about the missing women in less intimidating settings. He agreed to an interview in a hotel room, but partway through, he fled. He was missing for 20 days. When he was finally caught, he was jailed without bond. By then, 9 days had passed since the Back in August of 1993, just before the rape occurred, Garrison had led officers to a farm in Webster County. He claimed the women's bodies could be found there. No bodies were ever discovered, and a court order sealed all details of the search. It's unclear whether this is the same Webster County site that had previously been subject to a gag order where bones were found and were later identified as animal remains. At the time, the informant was unnamed. If the locations match, we now know the source: Stephen Garrison, a convicted rapist. Detectives are divided. Some don't believe he's connected, others aren't so sure. After all, why lead police to that farm in the first place? In November of 1995, then, a group of veteran detectives gathered to re-examine the Springfield Three case. They agreed on one major point. They believed that the motive was sexual assault. The detectives also reviewed the primary suspect list, which had grown to about a dozen names. They agreed on who belonged on the list, but not on how those individuals should be prioritized. Then in January 1996, a year and a half after the disappearances, a new person came into view: Robert Cox, a man once convicted of murder for a 1988 killing in Florida, whose conviction had been overturned. Importantly, Cox was living in Springfield on parole during the time the women went missing. His background was that he was an Army Ranger in the military and took part in the invasion of Grenada. In 1985, while he was stationed in Monterey, he was imprisoned for abducting a woman at knife point and later pulling a gun on a female soldier. Both of them escaped, and he was sentenced to 9 years. He was then paroled and back in Springfield by summer 1992. His Florida case resurfaced 2 weeks after the Springfield Three disappeared, when the brother of the murdered woman contacted authorities. At that point, police didn't even realize Cox was living in Springfield. When he was interviewed, he said that he had spent that graduation day with his parents at a golf tournament, and the next morning he had attended church with his girlfriend. Both verified his whereabouts. No physical connection to the abduction scene was ever made. But investigators did note that he worked for SM&P Underground Utility. This is a phone company with crews that survey underground lines near the Delmar Street house. In fact, he worked near Sherrill's home in the summer of 1992, a detail that was relevant to that suspicious anonymous note referencing a quote-unquote gas man checking for leaks near the house, which actually fit Cox's utility role. When police interviewed him in January 1996, they interviewed him for 3 hours. There were no earth-shattering revelations, according to Captain Darrell Crick, but Cox made statements that prevented him from being ruled out. When re-interviewed in March, he claimed he knew that the women had been killed and buried nearby, saying, "I know exactly where it's at." Why watch it on TV when you can watch it in person? He asserted Sherrill was the real target, saying the girls were collateral. Situations change. It's very easy to control 3 people, very easily laid down, tied. When asked if the case should be solved, Cox responded with, "Family, loved ones do not need to know the truth, at least not now." Now, Suzy's brother and Sherrill's son, Bart, he took their disappearance very, very hard. And after years of drinking and what he described as living in a haze, he returned to Springfield sober and determined to find answers. He was frustrated by the lack of progress, saying, "I want people in town to question the police. I don't want to have misguided anger toward them, but I do believe I have the right to question their competence at this time. Can the people in charge of this investigation solve this case? And if they're not competent, are they too pretentious to admit it? Or are there other reasons?" In response to growing criticism, the police chief instructed his officers to remain tight-lipped. He cited legal risk, saying he didn't want the department to be sued for discussing suspects. "Not to be secretive," he explained, "but the rules of law will not allow it right now." He did not specify which law prevented disclosure. By early 1996, Robert Cox was back in custody, and this time for armed robbery in Texas. Crucially, his former girlfriend recanted her statement, placing him in church the morning after the disappearances, admitting that she didn't know where he was that night. This prompted a reporter from KYTV, Dennis Graves, to revisit Cox, and in July, Graves recorded an interview in the Texas prison. A portion was aired on TV, and in this aired segment, Cox had said, "I know that they're dead. I'll say that. I know that." And Graves replied, "That's no theory." And Cox answered, "Yeah, but I know. I just know that they're dead. That's not my theory. I just know that." When pressed for further information, he refused to comment on anything except to say that he would talk more after his mother passed, and she was 82 at the time. As of June 2025, there's no public record that Cox has ever revealed the full story. In September of 1997, nearly 3 years after their disappearance, Suzy Streeter and her mother, Sherrill Levitt, were legally declared dead. Stacy's family chose not to, holding out that unless a body is found, there's still a chance they're alive. In August of 2002, investigators responded to a tip about an abandoned slaughterhouse near Marshfield. This is about 40 miles southeast of Springfield. Cadaver dogs identified 2 locations inside the building. Over 2 days, they recovered bone fragments and teeth, but lab tests determined the remains were over a century old and unrelated to the case. In April of 2003, another anonymous tip led them to a farm 5 miles south of Cassville. During excavation, they found an object with possible blood residue. DNA testing confirmed it was indeed blood, but it was so badly degraded that no identity could be determined. In December of 2010, Springfield appointed a new police chief, Paul Williams, a veteran officer from Tulsa, with nearly 3 decades of experience. From his first days on the job, Chief Williams made it clear that cold cases would be a priority, and one of the first cases he revisited was the disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Suzy Streeter, and Stacy McCall, the Springfield Three. In 2012, he formally launched a cold case initiative, bringing new investigators into the review process and applying updated investigative tools to the case. Despite this renewed attention, no new charges or breakthroughs followed. But for the first time in years, the case had fresh eyes on it, offering at least the possibility that someone might still come forward. In February of 2011, Springfield police then received a tip from freelance journalist Kathy Baird. After writing about the case, she said she'd gathered anonymous leads and psychic visions pointing to Cox South Hospital's parking garage near the Holston Cancer Center. She and engineer Rick Norland used ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, in 2007 to scan the still-standing structure. Now, Norland identified 2 anomalies in one spot and another nearby, shapes that he suggested were consistent with graves. GPR works like sonar. It sends radar pulses into the ground and identifies changes in material density or voids when signals bounce back differently. Norland explained that once he knew what Baird was investigating, he believed that these shapes matched grave locations. But police were skeptical. Construction on this garage didn't start until September 1993, over a year after the disappearances, when the lot was still an empty dirt field. While it's technically possible bodies had been buried before construction, if so, the groundwork would likely have uncovered them during excavation. Norland himself cautioned that similar radar anomalies can occur from roots or soil changes. Despite these GPR findings, no excavation ever took place. In June of 2012, locals held a vigil to mark 20 years since Sherrill, Suzy, and Stacy had vanished, with the case still remaining unsolved. Then in June 2022, a Springfield newspaper once again turned the spotlight back on the Springfield Three, reflecting on the case's 30-year mark and the fact that no new answers have emerged. At this point, I want to give you a deep dive recommendation. If you're interested in a more thorough exploration, Springfield native Anne Roderique-Jones produced a compelling podcast on this case. Her family was in the community when the disappearances happened. You can listen to that at pod.link, LINK/Springfield 3, the number 3. It's been more than 30 years. 3 women vanished from a home in Springfield, Missouri. No signs of struggle, no cries for help, just 3 purses and 3 sets of keys. In the days that followed, family and friends did what any of us would do. They looked and they called and they waited. And in the process, they walked through what may have been a crime scene. No one knew that night how critical those first few hours would even be. Since then, thousands of tips have come in. Suspects have been questioned. Leads have been chased, bones have been unearthed, psychics were consulted, vans were tracked, but none of it has brought them home. Over time, people move on, or they try to. A new police chief takes over, a detective retires. The press then turns to the next big story. But if you talk to anyone who is close to these women, you'll hear it. They don't move on. They just learn to live around the space that loss creates. But the fact is, these women are still missing. And maybe someone out there knows something, the one thing that could break this case open and finally bring these women back home. If you have any information, no matter how small, please contact the Springfield Police Department at 417-864-1810 or reach out anonymously through Crime Stoppers at 417-869-TIPS, TIPS. Before we do wrap up today, I want to let you know about what's coming next, beginning June 19th, 2025. I'll be releasing some new trial readings, 2 or 3 episodes a week, and they'll be available to Patreon members before anyone else. Each week, Patreon supporters will get early access, but don't worry, every episode will go public about a week after its Patreon debut. Now, the case I'm going to be covering is Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. If those names ring a bell, it's probably because you remember the Netflix documentary, Making a Murderer, and I'm guessing most of you have seen it. But if it's been a while, let me just say, it's a story that's hard to shake. In the meantime, you'll still get your regular true crime episodes here. Some will be updated and remastered from the early days, like this one. So if you remember those first releases, I promise they're going to sound a lot better this time around. Thank you, truly. Thank you all for listening and supporting this work. If you'd like more stories like these, more trial readings, what have you, please hit like, subscribe, and share with a friend. We'll talk again real soon. Bye for now.